Now, Annie Kenney was one of the two originals who went to prison. After the WSPU started, 1905, Sir Edward Grey went to Manchester to make a speech about some government thing. And Christabel and Annie Kenney decided they'd go, and if they couldn't get their questions answered, they would get up in the meeting and ask them. And the head of the Manchester City Police was there on duty. And she said she wanted to ask a question. He said, write it down and I'll see that Sir Edward Grey gets it. So they wrote their question down. What are you prepared to do for votes for women? And the question wasn't answered. So when it was getting near the end of the meeting, they got up, you see, and asked the questions, and they were thrown out. It was terrible to do. They were thrown out into the street and they were arrested for creating a disturbance. It was the police who created the disturbance, and they went to prison for a week. Well, they get enough women in and they couldn't hold a meeting.
What sort of things would the women do?
Oh, just get up and say, are you going to talk about votes for women or aren't you? When are you going to do something about a bill? And that kind of thing. And what is your party proposing?
And what would the response of the people at the meeting be, the men?
Usually they'd all jump up and jump on you and throw you out. And it's true, they were literally thrown out. I've seen women with practically no clothes left. In fact, two women at a Lloyd George meeting at Llanstwmdy, his constituency in Wales, had all their clothes torn off them, completely naked, and they had to walk miles. Now, Black Friday, there had been a bill in the House, before the House, and Lloyd George torpedoed it. It was so difficult. We had so many of these deputations, but this was one of the two worst. And, well, it was to start at Caxton Hall, and they were going quite quietly to Parliament Square. They just walked right down the street, and, of course, we met with horse police, mounted police.
Right.
Oh, it was a real shambles. My mother was still had bruises 7 months after that day. People were trampled. Mrs. Clark, Mrs. Packer's sister, died as a result. But this was the first time, this Black Friday, that windows had been broken. And that night, all the women got whatever instrument they could, and they had a window breaking. And my mother broke the Home Office windows, and ever after that she felt they were her property, and she always broke the Home Office windows. And when I was 16, I was arrested for the first time. There was a protest meeting in the main square, Victoria Square. My father was the only person not arrested who got up and spoke. All the women were arrested. And one woman who had been in this prison and had been forcibly fed, Laura Ainsworth and I, we went to send a telegram to the paper, saying how many people had been arrested. And we were coming out of the post office, and there were some steps down onto the road, and we were still on the steps, and the policeman came and arrested us both. Now, we hadn't done anything at all. Just gone in, sent the telegram, which the post office wouldn't accept, and the policeman took it. Well, we went up to the lockup. We had to appear in court the next morning, because I was still at school. But we appeared in court, and we couldn't get into the dock because we had too many of us. I don't know, 14 or 15. Well, we remanded for a week. So about 2 days after, my father said, "Are you going back to school?" And I said, "Yes, I'm going in the morning." He said, "Good." So I went to school. And the headmistress in the break, the mid-morning break, came and sent for me. And we walked up and down the assembly hall, which was a very imposing, great big hall. And she had once said to me that her gardener couldn't write his own name, and yet he had a vote and she hadn't. And she was at the top of her examinations to Oxford. She came up top, and she said, "I could just not have a vote." So here she was telling me that the ends didn't justify the means, and I should never have got myself into trouble. I said I didn't do anything. I came out of the post office. Well, I shouldn't have been anywhere near there. And just then, flying down the staircase from the boys' side of the school, and he was a very tall man, he looked like a bat. His gown was flying. He came and said, "Oh, my dear, I'm so proud of you." And that was the end of it. Well, I stayed at school for 2 days. And then my father and I decided it really wasn't fair. Nobody wanted me, really. I was a nuisance. They were afraid I was going to... I don't know what they were afraid of. I was embarrassing everybody. And so I went to the Berlitz School for 2 years. A lot of good it did me, because I was always missing classes and things because I had got other things to do. My father was very entertained about this. It was fortunate. I really was very fortunate. Well, then the second time... Mr. Asquith was coming to Birmingham, and my mother was going to break a window, and she said she had chosen her window. She wouldn't tell me which window it was, but she had her brick or whatever it was, and she was all set. Well, in the morning she had an attack of some kind. She was very ill, and the doctor came and said, "You're in bed now for weeks." And I had to stay in bed. So I said to Mother, "Well, you can't go breaking windows." No, and that broke her heart, So I said, "I'll go and do it for you." She said, "Your father will have a fit." I said, "Father isn't here." So I took her stones and I went down. He would speak at the Grand Hotel. But I got the most beautiful position on a corner, and behind me was the biggest plate glass window I'd ever seen. But right opposite, on the other side of the road, was a fire alarm. And all the crowds were gathering, my minister. And I thought, what a good idea to get the fire brigades all out round the hotel before he arrived. So I did. And glass was breaking. You could hear glass all over the place breaking. So people were breaking glass already. And Asquith's car came up and stopped dead in front of me because of the police cordons, you see, getting the fire engines round. And all this breaking glass. And the man standing next to me said, "Oh, that's them damn women." He said, "If I could just get hold of one, she'd never do anything again as long as she lived." I thought, oh, here goes. And I thought, well, I better do what I have to do now. And I had a very big pocket in my coat, and I got the stone out. And Asquith saw this movement. I could have touched him. And you see, he saw the stone, and he went right down onto the floor of the car. And way I went and hit the plate glass window, but it crashed that whole thing. And in 1 second, I was surrounded by police, and I was taken right to the police station. Well, we were all sentenced, you see, and we all went to prison in a horse-drawn black Marat. And we destroyed the inside of that, took all the paneling off. All we had were our toothbrushes. That's all we took into prison with us, was our toothbrushes. And but then I went as a paid organizer to London. I was a mouse, you see, then. And I called myself Murray Roberts. I couldn't use my own name because I'd have been arrested once. I was on the lam. It was so wonderful to be with all women and not have men butting in and giving you advice on it. We had a lot of men who were full of advice as to what we should do. And if you'd take notice of one, you would have to take notice of them all. Well, the very first job I did, I wasn't a militant organizer, and I was prisoner's secretary, and I had to be responsible for all the people who had been arrested. Then I was made militant. I was looking after all the militants and odds and ends. I had to know who was a militant, a real, a performing militant, and I had to know where they were. And I had to have a way of communicating with them and giving them money if they needed money. For instance, I had to find test tubes. Well, we had put one mixture in one and one in the other, and then put them in letterboxes. And when they joined, they blew the letterbox up. And if a house was being burned, you see, I chose a house sometimes. And then I have to find out whether there was a caretaker. And if there was a caretaker, I had to make sure that the caretaker was off the premises. Once, the Home Secretary's brother had built a house, and it was right out of London, it was in the country, and I wanted to blow that up. It wasn't, I don't know if it was furnished, I don't think it was. I think it had just been finished, and there was a caretaker there. And I got 2 girls who were going to do it. And they had a car, one drove the car, and the other one was going to do the firing. But that house burnt completely to the ground. It was completely destroyed. When I say I knew about that, and if anybody would say to me, "Do you want a good church to burn?" Well, they not thinking, not me, but they thought I could pass it on. I would know who to pass it on to, but nobody in the office knew what I was doing. But I didn't always decide what it should be. Some of the people were best left alone. Hilda Burkett, I would never have told her what to do. She had an uncanny sense of what to do. She was a beautiful girl, and she was just wonderful. She burnt down a pier at Yarmouth, because she got caught for that, but it wasn't burning it down that got her caught. It was the girl who did it with her. She said, I should never work with people. I always get arrested when I work with other people. She worked with a man once, and she said, for heaven's sake, take him away from me. I don't want him. I thought, he'll get me arrested. She said, he does the silliest thing. So I got rid of him. She married him later, oddly enough. But it started out by a few women wanting to protect Mrs. Pankhurst at meetings. And they felt that they were not physically capable of doing it because they didn't know anything about anything. We got two people who ran a school, a jiu-jitsu school and a wrestling school and what have you, to train them. And these two people were delighted. They thought it was the best thing that ever happened to them. Now they could prove, you see, how you could protect yourself. And the bodyguard grew. It got bigger and bigger. It got big enough to be able to send two lots of people in two different directions out of London. And then at the Albert Hall meetings or the White City meetings or wherever we had a meeting, when a mouse like Mrs. Pankhurst or Annie Kenney or something like that, they could be protected, you see. And I had so much to do with the bodyguard because at that time I was prisoner's secretary when that was started, and they say I had to go to court when they were arrested because the bodyguard, quite a lot of them got arrested. It was a lovely square, a clean place, and there's a house there. It's a fascinating house, and it had a balcony at the front. Well, now the woman who owned that, she invited Mrs. Pankhurst as a mouse to come onto her balcony and speak to the crowd. Well, Green Place was just overflowing, and the bodyguard was all there, and there was a fight, whoever there was, and the police and the bodyguard fought, and the bodyguard won. Oh, and they just fought anybody who tried to get into the house or tried to get Mrs. Pankhurst off the balcony. Just self-defense things, like the karate and things. And it wasn't called karate then, but they were very good at it. All these two, they were just marvelous. They could have been really badly hurt, because some of them were. But nobody ever left the bodyguard. Nobody ever resigned from bodyguard. We just got more people. All kinds. They were different. There were two girls whose father was a very well-known industrialist, and their uncle was the leading barrister at that time. They used to go to bed and then climb down the drain pipe, you see, and get out with the bodyguard. Yes, those two girls. But, see, a lot of the thing was done to make people talk about it, even if they hated it and were nasty about it. There was still, concern about it. Breaking windows made all kinds of people think about it. If you could do something to annoy men, it reminded them that women had no vote and they had. Well, it was property. You weren't taking anybody's life. You weren't destroying property, and that was an entirely different thing. But when I was arrested with Grace Rowe, at least Grace Rowe was arrested the day after. This was 1914, when I was being charged on 2 counts. And the first time was with being in possession of explosives. That's alone, and conspiracy against the Crown with Grace Rowe. But for 3 months, my last sentence, I didn't wash or drink or anything, except on Friday evenings when I had a bath. And that was the only water I ever touched. But I was forcibly fed. But they didn't give me water. They gave me brandy, and they gave me soup, and they gave me lemon juice. That's all I could ever identify. I was in a very old part of the prison next to the chapel. And nobody was ever forcibly fed until 3 or 4 days. So I wasn't even worried about it, but I could hear my sister in the next cell, and she was very upset. She was 15, and she couldn't think what had happened to her. And I was worried about her. The odd thing was there were a lot of doves outside, and I never knew whether it was my sister crying or whether it was the doves. Oh, by the way, the cell was horrible. There was no bed. There was just a plank. And I'd never been in a cell like that. And people came in, and there were 2 or 3 wardresses, I think, and a man, and they got up. You see, I had no chance to prepare myself. I didn't know they were going to forcibly feed me. And it was horrible, but it was easy for them because I didn't know. I never even thought about it, being attacked like that, but I was prepared every other time. They ended up by having 15 people in every cell with me every time. When I got into this hospital cell, you see, that I could put my arm through the open part of the window, and my bed, I had a real bed, with a little arm top to it and so on. I used to stand on there, and I could then reach this little opening. And when they brought my food in, I used to throw it through the window. That was the first thing, get rid of any food they brought in. And one day there was the most unholy scream outside. And so I got up, and there were workmen. I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know anybody was out there." "What the hell are you doing?" I said, "I am on hunger strike. I'm a suffragette, and as long as I'm here and they bring food in, I'm going to throw it out of this window. I've got used to it." Well, do you know that ever after, they sat under my window and had their lunch and read the newspaper to each other. I knew the news, but when the war started, they wouldn't let them have lunch there. They moved them. So I had great experiences. The lying-in ward was up above me, and I don't know how many babies were born in there while I was in there. And they used to have a chapel service on Sundays, and I could do wonders with that. I'd sing, and I'd sing my own words. I'd sing the March of the Women, and which Ethel Smythe wrote, our words to the Marseillaise. March on, face to the dawn of liberty. And I know green for hope, white for purity, purple for a loyal heart. It all comes into this, but I know I don't really remember them, but they are all. It seems such a long time ago that anybody would have to do so much to just get a vote, and doesn't it seem silly to you? I don't think anybody knew what was going to happen. I think lots of people were surprised. They were surprised themselves because if they had known what they were getting into, they wouldn't have got into it. But it evolved, and they got used to it, and they got more and more determined. And then one of the strengths of the union was there were so many working women who were just so frustrated at the conditions under which they worked, the payment they received, that they thought, well, let's let it go. We'd be better off, going to jail and trying to do something for ourselves. And then, see, we had so many men against us that you'd sometimes wonder if, you'd all be dead perhaps before anything really happens. And I think that's why I felt that burning things wasn't a wrong thing to do, because men are more concerned about property than they are about people. And, of course, the insurance people also were very concerned. Well, they're more vocal now, I think, than they were then. And I think there are many more men in sympathy than there were with us. Very few men were really understanding in my day. It was the vote. They understood about the vote. You see, I didn't have a vote. You don't have a vote. We do have a vote. But now they understand how women feel about it, about equality generally, and about their position. Because women are still second-class citizens in most departments, and they only get what they fight for. I think women have to do the fighting,